and get started. I apologize for not mentioning this earlier, but we are recording these presentations, and we plan on having them available most likely on our website, but I'll send an email out to all of the registrants once we have that final living place for these presentations, and then you'll be able to share those with anybody else. One of the reasons why we have the mic at the front for asking questions is so that it can fit in with the recording, both visually and the audio. So we're going to switch from our hatcheries and nurseries sessions, and we're going to move on to efficiencies and advancements in farm site operations. And for this session, we have Weatherly Bates as our facilitator. She's the owner and operator of Alaska Shellfish Farms. And her husband Greg are going to give our first presentation, Alaska Shellfish Down on the Farm.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming together. This is really exciting to see so many new faces and so many old faces, old friends. So thanks so much for having us. I'm Weatherly, this is my husband Greg. We farm together in Halibut Cove, Kachemak Bay. First of all, I'd just like to recognize our farm operates on the traditional homeland of the Dena'ina people. Locally in Halibut Cove, there's a lot of middens where there's shellfish, clams, mussels. So it's been an area where people have lived for thousands of years and lived off lots of shellfish, including our community. First of all, there's also a lot of herring salteries. They came about in the 1800s. That indicates there was a really rich source of phytoplankton in the area. There was 27 salteries. So that and some knowledge from our community. We depend a lot on our community members and elders throughout the process of developing our farm. We really try to use generational knowledge. People have been living in this area for a lot longer than we have, so really working with the local knowledge has been super important for us developing our farm.
Our background, we started farming in Maine in 2003, and then moved to Alaska in 2007 and started Alaska Shellfish Farms. We searched out Alaska, and Halibut Cove was a good fit for us. We obtained our first lease site in 2010, and been in production of oysters and kelp since 2012. And the income from our farm supports our family, and
Yeah, we're a vertically integrated company, so we don't have a hatchery, but we do market all of our products. And also, like Greg was saying, we rely on, our family is fed from our farm. So it's our only income. And we've been doing that since 2012, which makes us feel really happy. We're able to sustain our family. That's us up in Maine, Georges River oyster. We were there for a while. But we just really saw so much opportunity in Alaska. So much pristine water, wide open spaces, acceptance for mariculture, especially in our community where mariculture operations had been operating for decades. So we just really wanted to come to Alaska to start our farm.
Starting out, this is our first oyster barge. We figured out the best growing techniques for our site. It's just 2 floats strapped together with a hydraulic power pack, and there's a block in there, the buoys and we use long lines originally, and they would go down the middle of the float, and we'd just push it around with our skiff. It was all built with just repurposed material, just salvage stuff. The only thing we bought was the winch and the outboard motor. Everything else was given to us.
We spent quite a bit of time figuring out our site. We feel like that is very key to any operation, is locating your operation where you see potential for success. There's a lot of challenges in this business. We farmed all around Kachemak Bay. We relied on people, Jim Aguiar out in Prince William Sound, spending time on his farm. We worked very closely with Pacific Coast Shellfish Growers Association. We really try to gain knowledge through people that have been doing it longer than we have, and that's helped us a lot. Like Dana was saying, the openness of the shellfish community, we feel like that has led a lot to our successes. So this is developing our farm. We started out with just one long line, and then we developed these mussel rafts. They're 40 by 40 foot rafts, and also, how many lines? We've grown our farm up.
We currently have 25 lines, 400 feet. So we use the long line culture and the raft culture, and they have different, benefits, and with benefits of using either both.
Yeah, the raft helps us kind of use more of a dense culture, and the long lines for oysters also serve as habitat for kelp, so that's part of our business. We harvest the kelp along with our oysters. We really focus on having consistent production, like every week of the year we harvest year-round, so getting as much product as we can out to our markets. We typically like to have markets that take product all year, so that's kind of what we do.
We do deep water longline and raft culture, as we went over. We use Aqua Pacific trays. Our farm site, we're just putting some numbers out here because we have 23 acres, and we're trying to use it as efficiently and as productive as possible. We're permitted for 50 400-foot long lines and up to 30 rafts and 90,000 trays.
We started out, when we got to Kachemak Bay, there was a lot of lantern net culture, and so we found they were, for us, hard to work with. So we switched over to these Aqua Pacific wire mesh trays. We feel like they're a lot more efficient to work with. Just getting into them is easier, and like dumping the oysters.
The most critical elements of our farm are the farmers, the farm site, and the operations, how efficiently you can run your farm. And the farmers are super important, just all the knowledge you gain from other farmers and working your site consistently. This is us with oyster cages in the oyster boat. You go to the long lines, get the cages, and then bring them over to a float that has a tumbler. That's what we're doing here.
And as Eric mentioned, we feel like purpose is a huge part of the business, and every person on the farm has a really important job. We're not any more important than any of the farmers that are working on our farm. It kind of takes a joint effort and really getting reliable people that are committed to doing this work every day, and working with the environment has been pretty critical. So now we're just going to go into a little bit the specifics of how we farm our oysters. It's just one of many methods. There's intertidal culture, there's rack and bags. We do the type of culture that was in our area of Halibut Cove. It was already established, these long lines with lantern nets. We just changed to using cages. But I'll play the video now. This is our oyster tumbler. That's a conveyor. A lifting conveyor. Part of the efficiencies have just been mechanizing to make it a little less work on our backs. So we repurposed this materials originally from Penn Cove shellfish for mussels and built an oyster tumbler out of a mussel processing line. And here's the second video. It shows the oysters being dumped into the tumbler. Greg just built that with different size meshes, so the oysters can be sorted by size, and then they go out onto a conveyor where you can kind of hand grade them.
And the tumbler's up high, so everything that comes out of it is, you're not bending over. It comes out and it's all right there.
Yeah, ergonomic, I just had to throw this in here. Designed for efficiency and comfort in the working environment. A lot of this job is getting wet and cold. It's definitely one of the hardest parts of the job, we've heard from our workers. So yeah, it all is level, so we don't have to bend down and pick up our cages, and makes things a little more efficient. Yeah. So yeah, we try to repurpose as much materials as we can find. We're pretty fortunate. There's a big fishing community and lots of stuff. We call it like the graveyards in the industry.
And all of our boats were ex-fishing boats at one time.
Again, we try to take advantage of what our site has to offer. We have a large kelp set, so this is just natural kelp that grows on our farm. Those are oyster lines, and the oyster cages are underneath that kelp. So we harvest 7 varieties of kelp. We also do blue mussels. They naturally occur on our site as well. So they're natural set, and we rope grow them on these 40 by 40 rafts. It's like that boat on the left is
a salmon jitney.
Salmon jitney.
Converted into a mussel boat.
Work with nature, we feel, has multitudes of benefits. This is an example of one of our oyster cages. It's covered with laminaria kelp. We think that the kelp buffers our oysters from acidification, and it also creates a really diverse ecosystem on our farm that we think has multitudes of benefits. For instance, this is a tiger rockfish. They live up to 120 years, and they are proliferating on our farm. There's thousands of them in our oyster cages, and so that just to us indicates a really healthy environment that they're able to live and grow in there without us doing much. Our kelp processing is pretty simple. We line dry our kelp in the sun. If it's too rainy, sometimes I'll move it into a greenhouse, but I have felt that's a little more challenging. You don't get as good a quality as you do outside. The dried kelp is about 1/10 of the weight of wet kelp, and it's a lot easier to store. It's shelf stable for decades. It gives you product year round. It's cheap, easy storage. So we've been doing that. And this is oyster processing. We just recently added an oyster processing barge. We have an oyster processing location in Homer. Oyster processing is definitely one of the most labor-intensive parts of the job. We do hand count and hand harvest all of our oysters for quality control. So that is the processing. We also have a farm stand, and we feel like that has been one of the most amazing additions to our farm. The local public, it's self-serve, and like the honor system. So people being able to go out there and know that we trust them and that they can just go get shellfish. It's become like kind of a destination in our area. And there's the packing plant in Homer where we ship out of year-round. So another takeaway is we believe an ecosystem-based approach for farming. That means it's the implementation of agriculture management practices that use or take advantage of biodiversity, ecological services, or the ecological process. We really feel the more diverse our farm is, the healthier it is. We're basically just giving our animals a substrate to grow on, and they thrive amazingly. In conclusion, yeah, we have a goal. We want to grow 5 million market oysters and harvest lots of mussels and hopefully get some markets to process some of our kelp. We really need our nurseries small. We would like to build a Flupsy and potentially a processing barge in the future. So that's it. Anyone have any questions?
Just a quick one. How many times in the lifetime of a crop do you run it through your grater?
That size grater, a couple times a year, 2 times a year. Mm-hmm. Then when they're the seed, we're doing it every couple weeks. Mm-hmm. We have 3 tumblers.
So I have a question that's intrigued me. I love to eat oysters wherever I go. But if I see Kumamoto's, I'm going to get them. I like the taste. They're smaller, but you know what it is. So how do you differentiate your product? How do you brand it? Is there a reason we should have like a name for Alaskan oysters or something? And I remember when we had the crab industry, we had Beardai and Apelio. He said, would you like that? What's that? No, we called it snow crab, and it took off. So how do you differentiate your product, and how do you describe a difference in taste or something? You know what I'm getting at here?
Well, we do brand our oysters as Glacier Point oysters. I do think it's really important to be branding your own farm. At least that's how we've had success. There's a lot of restaurants, raw bars all over the country that like to serve platters of different oysters from different areas. So really taking advantage of your own farm and branding what you're doing and why people should eat your oysters. We go by Glacier Point. There's a glacier really close to our farm. They're glacier fed from Alaska. I think Alaskan oysters sell themselves, especially in the lower 48. By what we hear, you can't get a better oyster. So I think they really sell themselves. We really don't need that much marketing for them. We do use a little bit of the Alaska Grown program and for in-state, but by what we found, oysters kind of just sell themselves. Yes.
I was just wondering if your mussels are attracting waterfowl that feed on mussels.
Yeah, we do see some golden eyes and like harlequins, and we kind of feel like they might be doing a service. Our mussel set is very thick and dense, and you actually couldn't grow them out to market in that denser culture, so the ducks come in and kind of thin our mussels for us.
And the golden eyes only eat the smaller, the 1-year-old mussels. Mm-hmm. And we don't have much of an eider population. The sea ducks would eat the bigger ones. It'd be more the sea otter when the mussels get bigger.
Yeah.
Where are you selling your kelp? Any luck?
We do market some locally to our grocery store and to all of our oyster customers. We market it. So far, we haven't found a large processor in our area that could take the volume of kelp that we have. But we do like a lot of niche marketing, and I call it like grassroots marketing.
It's catching on at the grocery store.
Yeah.
All the locals are now buying it and consistently growing.
Like compared to 10 years ago, like there's so much more interest. Like we're able to move a lot more. Every year, I'd say it grows by 10 times the amount of markets that are interested in it.
Is your climate particularly good for the air drying?
Yes, Homer is kind of like the banana belt. And we do have really good spring conditions where it's like dry, sunny weather.
And we have to watch the weather. We plan it with the weather. So when it's going to be sunny, we bring kelp in. And we've done it so many times where we bring the kelp in and it rains and it's ruined. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
Are your mussels wild set or?
Yes, we grow wild set
Middle
mussels.
atrocitus.
The only thing we plant on our farm are Pacific oysters.
After you dry your kelp, how you storing it?
Just dried in a dry, controlled area where you can control the humidity.
Like 10-pound bundles.
Okay.
Yeah, like kelp bales almost. You can.
And it's good for years.
The growth rate changed in the 10 years you've been doing it?
Well, I think that's been really dependent on our seed quality. The better the quality of hatchery seed that comes to us, the better our growth has been. So I think there have been a lot of advancements in the hatcheries since we've been growing that have been helping our growth. And our own husbandry techniques, I think tending your oysters is the most important thing. Being on the farm and keeping your gear clean is how you're going to get the best growth. All right.
I just wanted to remind folks that all of this is being recorded. Not everybody can be here, so sometimes the questions are being missed if you're not up at the microphone. So if you could please do that for the benefit of folks that'll be watching this afterwards, and speakers could repeat the questions as well. So thank you for that.
Thanks. All right. Thank you. Next, we welcome Lexa Meyer from the University of Alaska Fairbanks and Alaska Ocean Farms.
Hi, thank you. All right, get myself set up here. Cool. I think I figure out how to use this. Yeah, a lot of you know me under many different hats, and today I have my University of Alaska hat on, so I'm going to make a lot of shameless plugs for their program and how wonderful it is. I've gotten a lot of help along my journey through my graduate degree, and yeah, if you have any questions about that, I can tell you it's just been wonderful going back to school, even at the ripe old age of 43, so. Anyway, this is my project. This is what I'm working on. This is what all the fuss is about. I really had this burning question, I know a lot of farmers do, how much kelp can we cram into our leases? These leases are expensive. And I decided to look at Alaria because, you know, not a lot of people are looking at Alaria. So again, why Alaria? It's like the second most cultivated kelp in Alaska by volume, and it's just a great kelp. It has a lot of potential for food. It's got a lot of like nice interest because it tastes good. It's got that midrib. It's got some crunch, some texture. It's just a great kelp to grow. But not a lot is known about it, interestingly enough. So I was like, you know, I'm going to work with Alaria. I think it's fun. Aquatic farming leases are very expensive. I mean, in some cases, depending on the size of your operation, how much you're growing in a year, it can be upwards of like 40 to even 50% of your annual operating costs. It's outrageous how expensive lease fees are here. I know that the state needs to make money, but especially when you're getting started, they are a significant cost. As you scale, that cost is kind of diluted down as you're making more money, but a lot of us in the industry just aren't there yet. So maximizing yield is important for that. I also feel that, you know, growing kelp in a smaller footprint is going to help save on labor. Again, that's a very high expense for a lot of operators or paying other people to help on the farm. A lot of operators now are single operators out there doing most of the work themselves. So operating on a smaller footprint helps with that. You're just packing more into a smaller space. I also kind of worry a little bit about sprawl. So one of the things that the industry is dealing with now is public perception. We want to have the best face forward, and that just helps with lease applications going through. It helps with community understanding of what we're doing in the mariculture industry. And so to keep the footprint small, I think that helps public perception. They're not worried we're going to take over entire bays like you see in Asia, those satellite photos of sprawling kelp all over the bay. We of course have protections against that thanks to our regulations in the state, but just to help with public perception. And then this problem that I came up with was, how do you measure density within the same array, and how do you create different densities in the same array? So my husband is an awesome farmer. I'm going to make a shameless plug for his abilities too. So he helped me design a modular system around this question. And these are the questions and these are the objectives. I'm not going to sit here and read these out loud. If you have specific questions about my project, you're more than welcome to contact me later in this conference, or my email address will be up here. Feel free to shoot me an email. So these are the arrays, and what's really nice about them is that they're created by lines, buoys, and then the big, thick blue lines are aluminum spreader bars. And so what I can do is I can test different line spacing within the same array. And what we try to do in science is we try to create treatments that are randomized, standardized, and then expose them to the same conditions. So we can say, hey, these were growing in the same general vicinity on the same system, and these are the effects we saw, and we know that we've controlled for some differences. Of course, we're working in the open ocean, and controlling for all differences is very difficult, but we do the best we can. So you can see the spacing I tested was 6-foot spacing, 4-foot spacing, 3-foot spacing, 2-foot spacing, and 1-foot spacing, so 5 different treatments. When you get down to 1-foot spacing, you get a lot of lines packed into one area. It's quite something. And this design allows you to pack those lines in, yet you don't see any sagging between the lines, and so you don't experience any tangling between lines. Lines don't touch each other. You're able to kind of maintain that specific spacing that you're trying to test. So overall, it's a great system. It's worked well at doing exactly that. And these were chosen by just talking to farmers and saying, hey, what are you currently using? People use between 6 and 4 feet currently. Some go as large as 10. But on average, like in the Kodiak Archipelago, most of the farmers I talked to were using between kind of that 4 to 6 foot spacing. And of course, if you can pack more lines in, let's give it a try. So then we went all the way down to 1. This is a side view. So just at the site, you're in about 12 meters of water. And the kelp is about 2 meters down, or just about 7 feet, like a little over 2 meters. This is where it's at. This is a map. This is Cowlison Island and Cowlison Bay. This bay is accessible from the road system in Kodiak, although we just take a boat from the Kodiak Harbor. It's about 14 nautical miles from the harbor in Kodiak. And I also measured all the physical parameters, because one of the ideas of why would we test, you obviously know that different farms will have different oceanic conditions. So we know what was going to happen at this site. We wanted to characterize all these different things and just say, hey, these are the general oceanographic conditions at this site. And fortunately, we had 3 sites that we tested within the test arrays, so at the top of the arrays, in between the arrays, and at the bottom of the array system. And guess what? So far, everything's the same between all test sites, so that's good. We've got a system that's all the same. But we know that even between farms that are only like a few miles away, that oceanographic conditions can vary. So when we do this, we can only really say, this is what happened at this site under these conditions. And so here's some of the biological parameters that we tested. And we've already measured some kelp. This array has been out now for 2 years. We just deployed it for the 2nd season. And so we're just measuring like overall final growth per treatment. So in the 1-foot spacing on the north array, how many pounds did we get in yield? We're also looking and taking a few samples for the carbon and nitrogen composition of the kelp. So that's kind of giving us like an overall view of like, how healthy is the kelp? What's it doing? How is it performing relative to the other treatments? And then we'll take 10 random 10-centimeter sections from one line in each treatment, and we're measuring the length of the longest blade. And this is to assess the growth, and it's the specific growth rate, so hopefully we can say how fast the kelp is growing over a period of time to its final length at harvest. And then from each line, when we harvest, we take a 1/2 meter sample from each farm line, and we get a total weight. We measure the density, so how many little kelps are present within that section of line. And then from that 1/2 meter section, 12 plants are randomly selected, and so we get to measure each of those for percent vial fouling, and then we also measure for each of those 12 blades the overall thallus length, width, and thickness. And I didn't mention it here, but also if they look like they're becoming reproductive as well. And so where are we? Again, we've deployed 1 year. We just redeployed for the second season. We're going to measure the physical parameters and that growth rate through June, and hopefully harvest sometime in early June again. We're going to harvest and sample kelp grown on the arrays again early June, fingers crossed. I've been told I will receive help this year. I did this all last year with only 1 day of help, so I measured something like 640 kelp blades on my own. It was a lot. And we're just going to collect a lot of data. And so this is a picture of us the first year seeding out, and so we'd have to stop and take pipes off, reconnect, put pipes back on, and keep going between the treatments. So it was a little bit of a challenge to seed out for sure. This is a picture of us seeding out this year. It looks ridiculous, but it helped a lot getting the bars up off the deck. This is a picture of the arrays in the water covered in kelp. This was April of 2022. So you can see they maintain their position really nicely in the water column, and they've got a lot of kelp growth on them. This is a picture from, so on the right-hand side that Alf's holding up, that was one of the 1-foot lines. So that's like from a center of the 1-foot treatment. And you can see that the kelp growth looks a little sad. And on the left, that is the 6-foot treatment. And what's amazing is when we went out early, before we were harvesting, and this was back in April, everything looked about the same. You really didn't see a lot of difference between the treatments, but by the harvest in June, there was a notable difference in size, and that was very surprising. And so this was extremely surprising. So this is the inside line, the line that's in the very middle of each treatment. This is off of one of the arrays, and it starts here on the left at 6, and then from 4, 3, 2, 1 on the far left. And it looks like I faked it. I honestly didn't. There was a very demonstrable effect of line density on kelp growth. And so things that we just noticed, these are observational, they haven't been put through their statistical rigor as of yet, but they look fairly significant, is that it appears that the density is negatively correlated with growth. So the denser you get, the smaller things get. The phenotype is altered by density, for sure. You can see that we have really short blades in the 1-foot treatment, and we've got these longer, thicker blades and wider blades in the 6-foot treatment. Yield is negatively correlated with line density. For sure, we get less kelp when we pack more in. And that is true between like 6 and 1, but to tease that out between 4 and 3, we really haven't yet. They're pretty close in yield. And there were definitely no significant differences in any of the water quality parameters between any of the different arrays. They're like within less than an acre of another. So here's another picture of measuring and harvesting kelp. Looks pretty cool. You can see the difference. So that's the 3-foot section on the right, and that's a 1-foot, or on the right, and that's a 1-foot section on the left. So very different phenotype, different size. And then what does this mean for industry? I know that a lot of you probably will not read my thesis when I'm done. So what I really want to do is I want to make this data available in a practical format. And so I urge anyone that has suggestions on that, whether you think it would be better offered in like a training or as part of like a Sea Grant program, some way that we can get this information well articulated to industry. That is my overall overarching goal with all of this. How can we practically apply what we've learned in this study? Taking it beyond, this is like my master's project, taking it beyond the master's level to the PhD. The PhD process will also include a full economic analysis based on density. So what really is the sweet spot given our conditions, and how would you make a determination on what works best at your farm and why? And then again, Eventually, I'd like to take all this data that I've collected, put it with other studies. There's some great studies that have come out recently regarding farm yield and yield optimization, and try to put this into some sort of awesome equation that farmers can plug in the numbers, and then poof, you've got at least some way to predetermine the yield at your farm based on your line density, or to plan what line density is going to work best for you, given your oceanographic parameters. And there's a lot of ways to do this. I don't have a lot of time to talk about that right now because it's a short presentation. But again, if you want to contact me offline, I'm happy to discuss. And again, I really strongly feel that the practical application of this research is very important to industry. So how can we take what we've learned? There's a number of us working in the same lab right now at UAF, actually here at the University of Alaska Southeast, but they're under the umbrella of UAF, that are working on some industry questions in kelp and bivalve mariculture. And we really want to make sure that this information is well articulated at the end of our studies. So if you can give us some suggestions along the way, we would really like to hear them. And then no question is absolutely too small. Small questions create big research projects, and they're very fun. So I urge you to reach out to me, to others in the research industry with your questions, because they can lead to really, really big research projects, and us on the research side of things love those questions. And then I'm a big proponent of strong collaboration between research and industry. The way to move this whole thing forward responsibly is through science and making sure that we have the numbers in place to guide things and basically prevent an ecological disaster. Nobody wants that. So with that, I have huge thanks to my husband again. He was the one that designed all these arrays and helped me set everything out, helped me harvest. Without him, none of this would be possible. And then I received a ton of support from the Alaska Seed Grant Program in Kodiak, outplanting, and working on this project. So big, huge thank you to them. And then the support facilities at the Kodiak Seafood and Marine Science Center. So with that, any questions?
Hi.
Hi.
On your array, especially with closer spacing, it seems like there'd be the probability of entanglement. And I didn't notice in your diagram how you accounted for tension in the system. I think you have maybe a 12-foot tide range or something like that in Kodiak?
Yeah, something like that. So you'll see, and unfortunately, I sent an updated picture and presentation, but that didn't make it into here, unfortunately, where you saw an aerial view of the arrays. And at low tide, you'll get a slight bow, but because the lines are affixed to the spreader bars themselves at a fixed distance, you don't see that. And then the arrays themselves have been pulled and tensioned with 2 anchors that are properly set at either end of the array. So it doesn't allow for that sagging in the middle that would cause lines to creep in and touch each other. So it's all about tensioning.
Maybe you have a little tidal action and that's causing the tension to stay?
No, the tidal action does not cause the tension. You may see a slight bow, but normally, like with high tide, we tighten it and it's straight as an arrow, right? Yeah, but at low tide, you might see like a tiny little bow in the whole system. But because the anchors are properly set at either end, it's pulled it tight. Talk to my husband, he's the engineer. You don't believe me.
Oh, great talk. So one question. So you saw, I'm interested in you took nutrient samples during the course of it. I'm really curious about the nitrogen passing through the farm and how that might impact the density-dependent results that you saw.
Right.
I mean, that seems like really important to assess, and along with current velocity and stuff like that.
Yes. So along the gradient, so the tide moves perpendicular to those sets. We had water quality monitoring stations at the top, and then in the middle of those arrays, and at the bottom. So the tide kind of flows one way with the tide exchange, and then when it goes back out, it goes the other direction. And so between those 3 stations, there were not significant differences in nitrogen levels noted. Now, on a micro scale within those sets, which I was not able to come up with a methodology for measuring, there could be nutrient shading happening. One of the other things could be light shading occurring because of the tight density. And so we don't know the exact mechanism, and that would be hard to tease out, but we can say that there are differences based on the line spacing. So, yeah.
I get to stand and ask a second. What was the nutrient content of the kelp? Nitrogen and phosphorus.
I can send you those results. I don't know exactly off the top of my head how to best articulate that, but we could send you that, yeah, based on treatment.
I just wondered if you control the density per foot, or if that's all the same, and how, if you control that on spooled kelp, or if the density is just like the natural setting?
No, so these were seeded using cultivated seed pipes, just as you would in a normal farm setting. All the spools were inoculated at 2,500 spores per milliliter, and spools were retained in the hatchery that had even growth. So I looked at subsamples under the microscope and made sure that we had approximately the same sporophyte density on each of the spools. And it was a lot. It's something like per linear inch should be like 8,000 plus little sporophytes. It's a lot. But that's standard for what we see, what we use on the commercial farm, so that's why we went with that density.
So you could have too many spores per foot, like if you didn't.
That's a magical question, and that gets back to some like hatchery husbandry questions and what we're currently doing in the industry in the hatchery world. And we don't really know what optimal spore density is by species. We just guess. And right now we just load on, myospores, and they settle and they grow. We have lots of sporophytes because in the seeding process we lose a bunch. We've seen it happen physically. And so to hedge your bets and make sure you're getting enough on there, we go with a very high density of sporophytes on the line. But you're correct, there could be a better optimization of line sporophyte density on those seed pipes.
My question was, so this past year you found that the optimal line spacing was 6 feet, correct?
No.
No?
No. So you have to remember that because you have more lines and in a 3-foot and a 4-foot spaced array, you're going to have more kelp, even though the kelp is a little bit smaller. So this is just preliminarily what I've been doing. The results will come out soon, and then I should be better able to say, given these conditions, this was kind of where the most kelp was produced, if that makes sense.
The other question was, I saw that you were going down towards 1 foot. Are you also going higher than 6 foot for line spacing? Or?
I am not going higher than 6 feet.
No, okay.
Going higher than 6 feet, you really start to lose a lot of land area.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, going off of just polling the local farmers in the area, everybody was kind of between that 6 and 4 foot range, and that had worked well for them as far as yield they felt, so I didn't go any higher than 6 feet. Currently, our farms, Alaska Ocean Farms, are spaced at about 4 foot spacing. So.
Thanks.
You get an answer?
So next we welcome Brianna back from Fisherman's Fresh to talk to us about community-supported mariculture, a community-based approach to seaweed farming.
Thanks. Hello again. Thanks, Lexa. That was really interesting. And I, for one, would be very interested to read your thesis. So thank you. So you might remember me from an hour ago, but I'm Brianna Murphy, and I'm a co-founder of Fisherman Fresh. But this time, I wanted to come up just to quickly plug an upcoming project that we have going on this fall. We're going to be hosting a community farm site at our commercial kelp farm, which is located just outside of Seward in Pony Cove. It's about 20 miles south of Seward. So what we envision is being able to provide interested potential kelp farmers with a space where they can lease grow-out lines to commercially farm kelp. And we would provide permitting assistance and source tissue collection for the hatchery stage, provide subsidized seed string for interested farmers, and then also be responsible for the farm site setup and removal of all the materials at the beginning and end of the season. And we'd also be able to provide transportation to and from the farm site, and also be able to provide transportation for moving the kelp biomass back to town at the harvest season. So in return, farmers will be able to get experience with getting some hands-on mariculture experience, actually maintaining their own grow out lines throughout the duration of the growing season. And we would be able to hopefully involve community members and be able to provide an avenue for anybody who's interested in getting into kelp farming but doesn't necessarily know for sure if it's for them, to be able to kind of flesh that out and gain experience doing it. As Lexa just mentioned, annual lease fees are criminally expensive, so it's kind of an easy way for people to get involved pretty quickly in the hatchery process or in the farming process, and a legal way to overcome some of the permitting issues that people face. I know the permitting time within Alaska has gone down to about 1 year, but that's still a pretty lengthy period of time for people who are just kind of knocking the idea of seaweed farming around. So we're really excited about the potential for this idea. Luckily, we don't even have to be bashful about what an amazing idea it is, because it was not ours. It was actually Jeff Hetrick at Eludic Pride who came up with the idea of offering people space to commercially farm kelp on our site. So we're really hoping that this can be a good opportunity to involve community members, and also we would be happy to provide lodging accommodations in the form of the palatial accommodations that are available on one of Kristen's many salmon tenders, in case there is interest that extends beyond the city of Seward. So if you are interested in getting involved, or if you know of anybody interested in getting involved and who just wants to kind of dive really quickly into kelp farming, please don't hesitate to reach out to us or come up to either Kristen or myself during one of the breaks. We'd love to meet any potential collaborators. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Shawn Thomas and John Cotton from Devil's Apron Seafarms and Ice House Oysters. Please come up. These guys made it all the way from coastal Maine. Thanks, everyone, for making the trek here. Oh, actually, sorry, I messed up. Okay.
Let's get it over with.
Okay, hey, John.
Good afternoon. My name is John Cotton, and this is my partner, Shawn Thomas, and we both own Devil's Apron Seafarms. We grow kelp, and we're here to talk about how and why we're transitioning to aquaculture from commercial fishing.
There you go. Do we click?
Yeah. We need a lesson in it. Come on.
Well, anyways, we'll just say that Dana touched on a lot of the stuff earlier. So lobstering, I'll show you a couple images here. He showed a big thing earlier, and I mean, it's down to one resource pretty much. We used to have everything. We had ground fishing, we had shrimping in the wintertime, and now all our eggs in pretty much one basket. 2021, we had a great year, and we were on top of the world, but that all changed in 2022. So you can see the average price, the drops. I mean, we saw up to $14 a pound. We're part of a co-op in Port Clyde. It was phenomenal, but it makes you think about diversity once you see the other side. So John and I have been talking about it for a while, and growing kelp seemed like an easy thing to do. John's been doing oysters for a few years now, and seems to be working out well for him. So diversity, that's the whole thing of it. Like I said, we don't have many options anymore. is ground fish. You know, 20 years ago, you could go out and make 3-4 trips a year and make a decent income. But as I said, that's pretty much gone as well.
Mainly from government regulation.
Yeah, mostly from regulations, overfishing. Last year, it came to the point where we had to go out and catch our own bait. We couldn't afford. With the price of bait doubled, the price of fuel doubled, it just became an absolute nightmare. Guys pulled up their traps in September, which is the busiest part for us, you know, the most productive part of the season. So by catching our own bait, which was a pain in the butt and a big learning curve, we actually saved, you know, maybe $20,000 in expenses, and it really helped us through the season. So shrimp, as we said, the shrimp are gone. Oh, sorry. As I said, the shrimp are gone. We haven't had shrimp for, what is it, 10 years?
Yeah, at least 10 years.
Probably says right
That's
there.
what we used to do in the winter when lobstering would slow down, and now you can't do that. So it's all on lobstering.
Last spring, John and I went down to North Carolina. We brought the pinwheel back and went tuna fishing the whole way up. And the whole time we were talking about diversity. Though we did have a good trip. I mean, the price of tuna was, I think we were one of the first boats to land that spring. And we got like an average of $10 a pound, which then dropped down to...
Yeah, now it's $2 a pound, and not mainly because the biomass of bluefin tuna is so huge. There's so many fish, and there's so many fish being landed, so the price crashes. It's the opposite of what everybody thinks. Pacific bluefin are endangered, but the Atlantic bluefin is in good shape. But that's changed. They changed that down to 1 fish a day because so many fish were being brought in and landed, so it would flood the market. So it's no longer commercially viable to do that. It's fun, though.
It is fun.
That's the same thing.
Yep, that was our trip
That's
back.
200 miles off Atlantic City. 200 miles off Atlantic City. That's in the Atlantis Canyon. That's where the bluefin tuna first show up when they migrate from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to Maine, Canada.
This talks more about the tuna fishery.
Same sad story.
So then we came up with Devil's Apron, and we're growing kelp. We're going to plant out 20,000 feet of seed this year. We've got 10,000 out so far. But we were so late to the game, we decided that after we saw the prices drop and drop and drop, we couldn't wait any longer. We couldn't talk about it anymore. We just had to go do it. So we got our stuff in last second for the application. And it's pretty much been the same all the way through. We got most of the gear in December. So we had to find a way to store the seed for a while until we can get our gear and everything built and ready to go.
You missed. Where is it? There it is.
So we built these traps, and I mean, you guys probably have a lot better ways, but as commercial fishermen, we're building our own gear all the time, so we have all the tools and stuff to do this. So we threw this one trap together as a storage trap. It holds 34 spools, I believe, and we just hang it off a dock in a secluded area. It's John leases a lobster pound where he grows his oysters. Very protected. We don't have to worry about ice. So we're fortunate for that.
That way we can wait if we're not ready. A lot of people don't like to do that. I've seen a lot of great success with it growing like much bigger on the tubes. Some people say it rips off. It seems to work well for us.
We had very good luck so far.
What is that?
Oh, that's it in the water. So yeah, we just hang it off the dock. When we're ready, we transfer it into a Exactic onto the boat, so it's easy to manage. It's easy to transfer onto the skiff and then into that container on the boat. So that's a seed. Short and sweet. There it is.
Any questions? Any questions? Oh, no.
You know, I was just kind of curious. You're talking about, the lobsters kind of going down and the shrimp going down. And what do you attribute the shrimp going down? Shrimp, generally speaking, are so prolific along the West Coast, most times, not always, but it's just like miles of shrimp. The big gig there is the size of them.
Right.
But what do you think is going on with the shrimp on the East Coast?
We were actually talking to John this morning about that. Well, at first we thought it was overfishing. So what happened was, it was an open fishery, so a lot of guys saw that there was money to be made. Lobstering was bad. We had no other options. And they flooded it. They flooded the market and overfished. But the reportings, the landings, nothing could keep up. And so that's what we thought it was for a while. But we're learning as of late that they think a lot of it's due to the warming waters. And they also think that the squid are staying around a lot longer and that the squid might be eating the shrimp. So, I mean, we still see them when we haul our traps and come up on the rails and land. So there are shrimp left out there. But
when you say warming waters back there, you obviously have in-hull temperature gauges and whatnot, and I don't know how long you've actually been doing this, but have you actually noticed over the years a major difference or almost no difference? The reason I'm asking that question is...
Major difference.
Yeah, the Gulf of Maine is warming up at a rate a lot different than any other part of your water.
Yeah, the fastest in the whole world, I think.
Oh, all right.
But I don't know the exact degrees, but every summer it's a little bit warmer. And the same with the squid on the shrimp, they eat the herring too, so the herring are being depleted.
Right.
That was another lobster bait that we use now. Now it's so expensive because there's such a low quota on the herring catch because they're depleted just like everything.
Right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For clarification, the kelp cages, do you get your seed from a hatchery first? Okay.
We get these seeds from a hatchery. We just built those because we had to have a way to store them.
Yeah, just to hang on to them.
So we got the first, 34 spools, and I believe it was November. So what are you going to do with 34 spools? We didn't really want to run a long line.
Those are all half used. That's not bad spools, yeah.
We did a similar thing, but at first I thought this was your hatchery, and I was blown away.
No. Just storage.
Yeah, I just also had a question about the spools. About how long did you leave them off the dock?
They're still in there a lot. We still have about 10,000 feet in the water.
And so, like, you get them back from the hatchery, and then you'll leave them on the dock for a month, 2 months?
We left the first batch we got them on November 17th, and we set out the first array December 31st. We set out our second array January 17th. And we also got a second batch on December 20th. So it was 68 spools altogether. So we had to find a place to put them.
Some people think that when you let it grow like that, it rips off. It kind of does, but the kelp is so strong. It's so big. We've seen huge growth on that kind of stuff.
Some of the longer ones, they just stayed, and you can see it. Just some of the ones that there was no growth at all. The ones we just set are outgrowing the first ones. So.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Next, we have Dave Bailey from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. Please give him a welcome.
All right, back again, but now talking about some stuff that's actually down in Alaska. So we've been doing a Department of Energy project since 2018 in Kodiak, Alaska. We have a test farm up there. And so there's a lot to talk about, but I'll sort of pare it down to like the big lessons learned in seaweed farming at this like very dense scale. But first, I have the controller. All right, first we get a shout out to the team and two people here in particular. We have Nick Mangini and Alf Pryor. They're both in the audience. So if you guys have any questions about any of this, I'd turn to them first and then the rest of us second. So the team, we have the farmers, we have the science team, we have the engineers, the industry and outreach. Greenwave's here, AFDF's here. I don't know if Blue Evolution's here. And then we have UAF, which is Mike Steckel actually leading this project. So what is a scalable farm? And the scalable farm we decided to use for this project is a 10-ocean catenary module. So this is developed by Cliff Gowdy. And we started first deploying these in about 2017, 2018, and somehow I turned into like Cliff's crash test dummy for these things. He designs them, we figure out how to work them. So the catenary module has that catenary shape, which gives it the ability to have really close line spacing and even tension across the system. So with these systems, we can create the same amount of tension across that spread there. And then you can scale these by combining them. You put them side by side. And you can see the first one has 8 anchors, but if we combine another catenary within that module, we only add 2 more anchors. You do have to scale up certain components of that system, but we feel like we can really increase the density in your lease with these. So this is a figure, and you'll notice that I don't really talk in pounds because each site is different. So what site might be able to grow 5 pounds per foot, another site might be able to do 3 pounds per foot. So we never really talk in poundage, we'll talk in amount of grow line that we have at that site. And you'll notice here that we have the water depth as the x-axis there, and that's really controlling how much growing capacity we have in that area because we have all the anchor scope. So when you're picking out like a lease area, you have to account for the water depth and how much you can actually fit into that because you lose so much growing area potential by increasing your scope of your anchors, by going in deeper sites, and then also increasing the spacing between lines. So those 3 lines at the top are the 3-foot spacing, and then we go down to the dashed ones, which are 6 foot, and then we have like the normal long lines, which is about 20-foot spacing. And you can see that the amount of grow line potential in that area is really diminished. So the first thing this probably seems pretty obvious, but there's optimal growing depth for each site. So each site has its own environmental characteristics, and you have to figure each one out independently. And what we really like to use are these diagonal long lines. So they allow us to test growth over the depth. So we actually seed the lines on that diagonal on both sides, and so we can track growth across that depth range. And at this Kodiak site, so this is Nick Mangini's site, we find the best depth between about like 4 feet and 12 feet. And that's great. It's like, obviously, just keep your lines there. But lines sink over time as they grow. So we have a pressure sensor on there, and this is the first year. So it's about 200 feet spacing between all our flotation. And you see it sinks down. So it's sinking down to a depth of like 15 meters or so over the course of that grow season. And on the right here, you can see that the line sag really attributed to the lack of growth in that farm. So we're really not optimally using that area because we're letting our line sag. So obviously, you're like, all right, we'll just add some more buoys or whatever. But when you have these big systems, it's not really that easy. We had to come up with a way to install these set lines. So these set lines travel perpendicular. Is there an actual pointer on this thing? So it travels perpendicular across our array every 100 feet. So that's supporting those lines and allowing it to stay in the optimal growing area. So this is year 2 at the farm. You can see that the pressure sensor showing that the grow lines in the middle are staying in that optimal grow zone. And when we sample the farm, we don't find any sort of spots with that diminished growth, which is a real important thing. But with the set lines and with anything you do on the farm, you have to think about the entire process because we just want to keep the lines up. So it's like set lines, easy. But then it's like, all right, how do I install the set lines? Do I do the set lines before I start seeding? Do I do it after seeding? There's all these things you have to think about when you're kelp farming. You have to think about all these processes and how that thing that you're introducing is going to affect all those things downstream. So with the set lines in particular, they became, you know, a pretty hard thing to do, and they're still sort of challenging. Like, we have 110 lines in that small farm. It's like, when do we connect them? How do we connect them? Do we add them over the top? Do we add them in the bottom? And we're still like constantly messing around this. But this figure is here to just make you think about that entire process when you think about every single little stage. With these catenary systems, they rely on proper tension across there, and to keep that tension, they're at a specific length. So every line has to be measured like to a specific length. And we actually pre-stretch all our lines, so we get it to an exact length, like plus or minus an inch or so. Because if you're off a foot in your measurement, you're gonna get super sag across that line. You're not gonna have the right amount of tension. So we spend a lot of time playing on like football fields, baseball fields, parking lots, just measuring, coiling line, and setting up these systems. And our first couple of years, we actually got pretty good at deploying this whole system at once. So we could deploy 55 lines at once and just make 4 connections. And then we get cocky and tried new things. And then that's Alf over there looking at me, trying to unwuzzle all that line. That was about 110 pieces of line, all different rope types. So they're floating, sinking, and it just created a mess. And it's something that could have been figured out a lot sooner, but it was rushed because we were like, we got to get this thing out. But preparation is key, especially in these really complicated systems. Harvesting. So harvesting, I think, is one of the easier parts of the farming process because there's not as much pressure. And we're not ever trying to land too much. You know, the processes are always controlling how much you can land. So whether maybe it's 15,000 pounds that day, there's enough time in that day to land all that seaweed. It turns into like a materials handling problem. And how we looked at this is through small boats and big boats. And originally, we were using Alf's set net skiff to harvest, and then we harvest into brailer bags and then toss those brailer bags into the water and sort of float them behind us like little ducklings behind the boat. And those hold anywhere from like 700 to 900 pounds. And so it's a way to alleviate storage on the boat, and then a tender will come and pick those up. And then in subsequent years, we moved on to our Harvest Buddy, which is a like purpose-built little barge. It's got no engine on it. We sort of position on the farm, and kelp comes up a ramp, hits a hydraulic cutter or a spinning cutter. We're still sort of working on all this. Falls into the brailer bag, and then we dump the brailer bag out the back. And then we've also tested out this large scale or large boat harvest. So you can see like it's a lot of kelp. And you really don't think of that kelp weighs that much until you start really harvesting it and moving it and pulling these lines. They have like a lot of inertia. So the second you stop, these lines are like going under your boat and causing all sorts of problems. But the biggest thing with harvesting is talking with your processor and understanding what they want out of the kelp. And so I think we can advance processing or harvesting a lot, but it's going to rely on the processors telling us how they want that kelp. And we just need to increase the actual volume of the stuff that's being processed. All right, so this seems obvious, but seeding is the most critical step. You do a crappy job of seeding, you're going to have a crappy harvest. And this is something, you know, at the beginning of this project, we sort of took for granted. We started off just doing this 5-line seeding on the left where we put the boat perpendicular and we could seed 5 lines at once. We're like, well, that's great. You know, nice flat day, you can do anything. And then 2 years, or the previous growing season, it was really cold. I mean, like well below freezing. And this picture's from Nick out there, and you can see that the kelp is actually freezing to the spool. So the seed string is like a quarter of the way down, but there's still kelp stuck to the spool. So that led to, in this picture on the right, like a splotchy farm. So it's like seed, no seed, seed, no seed. And that's something that happened like right off the bat. So we're working on different ways of trying to deal with the seeding process now. One way we're going is direct seeding. And this is actually seeding the grow lines with your gametophyte cultures that I sort of mentioned earlier. And this doesn't require spools and all that machinery. You can just potential it. So I say this hypothetically. We've done this at like small scales and it's worked. We need to gear it up and make sure it works just as good as the seed string. But we can test different ropes. We have a couple experiments going on in Alaska right now with all this. And then we created this underwater seeder. So instead of the kelp being in the air, you actually put it on this little ROV thing that you attach to the line, and then it spins its way down the line. So this enables seeding when it's really cold out, or when the conditions like don't allow normal, easy seeding. So, the big take-home messages for this is like each site is different. So when we say a catenary module, that could be any spacing. It just is like the catenary shape with 20-foot spacing, 10-foot spacing, whatever your site is best for your site. And like Lexa said in her study, like each site's going to be different. So the density you plant at one site is not going to be the density at another site. And there's all those things like the nutrients going through, the current, all these things sort of play a role. Buoyancy is critical. You just got to keep the kelp up, and that's going to change. And if you have like low salinity in your area, you're going to want to be below that optimal zone just because the salinity's there. There's all these factors. And I would recommend that each year you're doing one of those like diagonal lines or vertical lines to figure out exactly, does that optimal depth change year to year, or is it the same? Just so you can get the optimal growth out of your site. Line length, we can make these systems as long as you want, but there's a practicality to that. You get sag, you get stretch, all that sort of stuff. Pre-tension is really important, and someone asked about tension. How do we keep tension in this system? So it's tensioned with these dead-eye tensioners at low tide. And then there's also chain on the bottom. So that chain's pulled tight, and so we have it off the ground at low tide. And then when the tide rises, or when the tide goes up and down, that chain is actually providing that tension there. The seeding, there's still a lot of work to be done there. Hopefully we can sort of crack that and make it really efficient. And then harvest, it's a materials handling problem, but really we need the processors' help to figure that out. And I guess I'll take some questions. Actually, before I go, Robin McKnight from AFDF made this nice little brochure which sort of like highlights everything I pretty much just said, if you guys are interested. I think it's in that back room over there. Oh, no worries.
Thanks so much, everyone. Now we will take a poster session lunch provided by...
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks to the speakers for being willing to come up here and talk to all of us. I hope you spend some time at lunch and during the breaks to continue to ask questions. I know we're kind of limited on time, so not everyone gets to ask all their questions. We did have quite a few people bring posters. You look around the room, you could see them on the wall here. We have lunch provided in the back, so please enjoy lunch and then take some time to read the posters. The authors may or may not be standing by them. We didn't ask them to stand by them, but go and find them. Everyone has a name tag on, so they should be here. So enjoy lunch.